Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you're keeping well. In this episode, I'm going to be speaking about the fundamental nature of a side of reality which we don't really see, we don't really experience, we don't really trust, we don't really believe in. But I personally have a lot of my own personal experience that has led me to make some incredibly fruitful realizations I would never ultimately believe if I hadn't experienced certain um, supernatural phenomenon myself. So in this video, I'm going to be speaking about precognition, the non-locality of consciousness, and psychic perception and intuition, which all sound like crazy things until you experience them for yourself, until you validate these things for yourself. Then all of a sudden, it doesn't seem so crazy. It seems extremely real, and it formulates your perspective of reality in a brand new way in which you may have never really experienced before. Before I start off, I want to go ahead and say thank you so much to everyone on Patreon. Thanks to you guys, I've been working and coding every single minute of every single day. Like last night, I went to bed 5 a.m. I woke up at 9 a.m., continued working. That's the sort of thing I'm doing. The sort of thing I'm doing right now, which is quite crazy, I'm building a unbelievably advanced application, especially for a solo developer that will definitely be launching this year. And I'm making sure of it. That's why I'm putting in these crazy hours. Um, but yeah, I just want to show you like what I'm doing right now is so ridiculous. To be honest with you, I'm basically taking every single emoticon that you can find, turning it into a sprite sheet, which is an image sheet. And then I don't know how I have to do this, but I'm going to have to name every single one of these emoticons just so that they can appear in my application. So this is the sort of stuff that I'm doing, and creating like crazy, unbelievably immersive experience. And I'm doing everything myself thanks to you guys, front end, back end, databasing, potential machine learning, security, AI, etc. 3D modeling, music design, just everything you can possibly think of that goes into an extremely immersive 3D experience. I'm actually using a game engine in order to develop this, in order to create a social media application with a immersive 3D experience ultimately. So that's enough of that. That's just to let you guys know where I'm at, what I'm doing, why I've been quiet, why you haven't been really hearing from me. And also to let you know, like your support on Patreon is allowing me to do this. And so once this launches, I'm going to be repaying you guys every single way that I can. And I'm really looking forward to you guys becoming part of this immersive digital community. Anyway, let's get straight to the conversation of this video. So the title of this video is An Undulating Reality Beyond Our Perception. What undulating means is a oscillating and wave-like properties. So something that has oscillating and wave-like properties that go up and down, maybe not so much in the literal sense, but life has an ebb and flow. Everything has a cycle. The cyclic nature of reality is undulating, in the fact that it is cyclical. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly. And the fact that it is ultimately wave-like in the fact that it oscillates. We oscillate through day and night. We oscillate through frequencies. Everything is ultimately a frequency. So undulation or undulating refers to the frequency-based nature of reality, the wave-like properties of reality. And so when we look at reality, we check that everything ultimately is vibrational. Every single element in the periodic table, every form of energy, sunlight, carbon, matter, even so-called black matter, dark matter, these are all frequencies, right? And so we are able to see all of the visible frequencies that take place in the form of visible light that the human eye can perceive. And based on the light spectrum, that's not even 0.5% of all perceivable light. So we are not ultimately genetically engineered in order to perceive the invisible wave-like properties of reality. And so what you need to also remember is that our consciousness, our mind, our brainwave frequencies are exactly that. They're frequencies, they're undulating frequencies. You're emanating and excreting, I don't know, excreting is not the correct word, but I just like to use it. Ultimately, neuroelectrical chemical frequencies from your brain constantly. And so every single thought you have is firing a new neural pathway, a new chemical release, a new chemical electrical pattern that's taking place in your brain. So a new frequency-based emanation that doesn't only emanate from your brain, it emanates from your brain into your cells, into your DNA, which are all constantly communicating through light-based signals and ultimately frequency, through electrical nervous system, and a lot of stuff that I would say we haven't even really discovered yet. We don't really know everything about the brain and the body. For instance, we don't know to this day where the brain stores memory. We have absolutely zero idea. We know not even 10 to 20% of the brain, how it works, how it operates. As I've just explained to you, neuro scientists have no idea where the brain stores memory to this day. So what you got to realize is that your brain is constantly oscillating and cycling through electrochemical energies and frequencies. And pattern-based thoughts, pattern-based behaviors, pattern-based choices are ultimately creating neural patterns and neural networks within your mind and your brain, which have macro and micro undulating frequencies that are determined by your own biology and determined by the natural environment in which it is that you live in. So day and night cycles, so forth and so on. The fact that the human body needs sleep and rest, and that the fact that our brain cycles and oscillates through different brainwave frequencies, alpha, beta, gamma, etc. And so the reason I'm starting this conversation with reminding you about the frequency-based nature of your brain, the frequency-based nature of reality, is because there is a realm of thought that exists in a realm of frequency. There is an invisible realm of consciousness that exists in a realm of frequency. Your heart emanates an electromagnetic field that can be picked up by electrocardiogram from 1.5 to 2 meters away from you. It just goes to show that you are emanating and emitting an electrical field with basic medical instrumentation that can be picked up to 2 meters away from you. So if you're emanating an electrical field 2 meters away from you, you're emanating an electrical field technically all over the universe, because this wave realm, this frequency electromagnetic realm, doesn't really abide to the natural laws of physics and the limitations that the natural laws of physics ultimately place upon it. Meaning, and I know I'm getting complicated, I am currently right now using a verbose explanation. Verbose is a new word I just learned. It means using too many words to describe something. Using too many words to describe something, and that's ultimately what it is that I'm doing. But I'm just trying to flesh out where my mind's coming from this angle, because I'm going to discuss psychic phenomenon. I'm going to discuss precognitive abilities, ultimately meaning our ability to be able to perceive into the future, our ability to have precognitive intuitive capabilities, our ability for our consciousness to ultimately extend our human physical body. I've been doing my own personal research, as you've been seeing on Patreon. I've been listening to a lot of near-death experiences. One of the common themes in the cases where people who have ultimately been declared clinically dead have reported leaving their body and seeing the world and reality around them, and later being able to verify that what it is that they were seeing was actually happening while they were dead and while they had left their body. In fact, there was one story of a blind person at, I think, 6 or 8 years old, I can't remember, but he had died and left his body, and for the first time ever, he was actually able to see. I think he was able to see what his parents and his mother looked like. He was able to see what his house looked like. And he saw a whole bunch of stuff. And ultimately, he was revived and he'd come back to life, and he had come back to being blind. So one thing you got to know about blind people is when they don't visualize stuff. They don't have mental imagery of visual imagery, and they don't visually perceive stuff when they dream either. So that's not the only case. There's multiple blind people that have reported ultimately leaving their body and seeing for the first time during near-death experiences. So I completely, totally, and utterly believe that. The research is phenomenal. There's a lot of scientists and doctors that have been into this and have written many books and developed certain scientific institutions. And ultimately, there's so much research on this topic, and what it's ultimately showing is that these people are reporting being able to experience consciousness beyond the physical constraints of the 5 senses of your physical biological body. And ultimately what this implies is that our consciousness, as I've just said, is not dependent on your body, and your consciousness is non-local. It exists beyond your body. It does not require a physical biological mechanism in order to perceive or function. In fact, from the stories of these blind people, our physical bodies can ultimately give us huge limitations within our perceptual capabilities. Because a lot of people that report having these near-death experiences ultimately report being able to see and experience life far more clearly than in their physical body, and report being far more conscious and far more alive than they report being in their physical body. So, that's great and everything as circumstantial evidence, but it's really good to have your own experiences to be able to validate these phenomenon for yourself. I was always somewhat on the fence within regards to precognitive psychic capabilities until eventually, after a traumatic experience, they started happening to me. And I've had multiple precognitive experiences. And what it usually looks like is I'll be lying down and closing my eyes, and ultimately a vision or a holographic image will form within my consciousness or in front of me in what appears to be some sort of overlaid spatial consciousness environment. And sometimes I will see stuff through my eyes in the future. So I'll see what I'm going to see through my eyes in 2 days' time. Okay. And sometimes a lot longer than 2 days. And so this has actually happened to me a couple times. And at first I was quite doubtful as to what it is I was interpreting of it. But ultimately, I've had a lot of affirming experiences that have basically proved it to me and proved it to myself that, yes, precognitive abilities and capabilities most certainly do exist. My most recent experience, I was basically meditating and closing my eyes. And I was ultimately looking, and what I had seen was this carpet, this very detailed carpet with a detailed pattern. And I'd recognized this carpet, and I saw this cat. We have 2 cats here. I saw this one cat on this carpet. And while this experience is happening, I'm like, sort of like half conscious, and I'm asking myself, is this carpet in my mother's room? And so the next day I had sort of forgotten about it, and I didn't actually bother looking into my mom's room to see if that carpet actually was there. And I'd ultimately forgotten about it until 2 days later, since having that experience. I went to my brother's room, and what ended up happening was I opened the door and I walked in. And as soon as I walked in, I saw that exact carpet with that exact cat right there. in that exact position. And I couldn't believe it. I was so absolutely astounded. I was like, wow, here's another affirming, confirming experience where I'm ultimately have proven to myself that, consciousness is non-local, and precognitive abilities do exist. And in order for precognitive abilities to exist, your ability to see into the future, your consciousness must be non-local. It must not be constrained by your current time space position. So right now, my time space position is in this room, in the city, in this country, and at this current real time time that it is currently right now, which is like almost 8:30. And so what that essentially means is our consciousness is not limited to one single real time time space position. Your consciousness actually extends into the future. So if I'm able to see 2 days into the future, basically that means you're able to see 2 years or 20 years into the future, because you cannot see 2 days into the future without being able to see 20 years into the future. Because what that ultimately means is that although we experience time in a linear fashion, time is ultimately non-linear beyond our linear experience. It's, in a way, I wouldn't say three-dimensional. I don't think that ultimately defines it correctly. But basically, our consciousness, for one reason or another, and it goes back to this frequency thing, our consciousness exists within an imperceivable realm of frequency through perceivable perspectives and ratios of frequency that we're able to observe with our current level of technology and science. So what this means is, like, if I'm able to see 2 days into the future, and I'll close my eyes and I'll see a vision that will happen in the future. Like sometimes I'll see number plates. One time I was in the shower and I was closing my eyes and I saw number plates, and that I remembered that exact number plates, and then I decided to walk down the road. And then sure enough, I saw a car with exactly that number plates. So this hasn't been happening to me forever. This is a recent thing that started taking place like a year, 2 years ago. And ultimately what it's done for me is proven that precognitive abilities do exist, which is a huge relief for me, because the implications of that are quite amazing and quite astounding. Okay, so if what I'm saying is true and you do believe what it is that I'm saying, and what I am saying is true, I have absolutely no reason to lie to you. I only speak about what I believe in and what I've experienced myself. But ultimately, what that means is that my consciousness and your consciousness is not limited to this physical body nor this current time-space position, and can perceive a time-space position in the future. So in order to perceive it, you're perceiving a light-based configuration. That's what I saw when I saw that cat on that carpet. Exact carpet, exact cat, exact position. And this is how I've rationalized it in my own mind and the deductions that I've made after having this experience. But ultimately, somehow my consciousness had been able to perceive a future light configuration in a future time-space position. So somehow I had seen the light compromised in that room in order to create that scene within a future time-space position, which ultimately means that if I was able to do that, which I did and which did happen, it means that all light-based future configurations of all reality technically exist simultaneously right now. Meaning, like right now, there's a certain light-based configuration in this room. There's photons, light waves, UV rays, etc. And they make up the current visible picture that I'm seeing right now that my brain is able to interpret. So every single moment has its own light-based configuration, right? So this present moment has its own variable-based light-based configuration, right? The picture you're seeing right now, like basically, for instance, to give you a simple example, you watching this video at 24 frames per second, every single frame is a still image which has a certain pixel count, depending on the resolution, 1920 by 1080 pixels. And that's however many thousand dots slash pixels, which are ultimately a still frame, which is a compromisation of a data image in the form of pixels. So you can, in a way, look at reality in the same way, although our reality doesn't have pixels. It's so unbelievably seamless. It's so hyper realistic and so unbelievably seamless. There's no frame rate in reality, right? But ultimately, if you had a pause right now, you would pause the light and the environment as it is right now. So that's a light-based configuration. It's a variable outcome of light and physicality, you know? So what I'm essentially saying is that every single light-based configuration, which is any moment that ever take place in reality, is simultaneously accessible and occurring right now. Every single future moment is simultaneously occurring in this present moment. And why wouldn't it be? Because we only exist in this current limiting realm of time. We don't exist beyond this limiting realm of time. So why wouldn't that be the case? Our consciousness exists in an extremely linear fashion, as I've explained, but beyond the conventional realm of physics, which ultimately creates time and space or defines it, exists a realm beyond time and space. Okay, and so having that experience for me proved that yes, our consciousness is non-local. It's actually by non-local, I mean it's not confined by any time or space. It can move through time and space. It can perceive through time and space. And every single moment that could ever exist or has existed is somehow accessible right now. And I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but you have to think about how crazy reality is in itself. Reality is nuts, it's mental. And ultimately, the fact that everything in existence has somehow come from a void of nothingness, but somehow somethingness at the same time, is unbelievably perplexing and beautiful. And so this realm of physicality, you know, matter, carbon, is what we see. But beyond it exists a realm that exists beyond any realm before there was any form. It's the realm of formlessness that had to have existed before any realm of form was ultimately conceived and brought into existence. So I just want to have a cigarette. So I've had experiences where I've seen the future by closing my eyes and having a visualization, a vision. And 2 days later, 2 months later, I'll see exactly what I saw through my eyes. So like when I have the vision, it's like I'm seeing through my eyes 2 days ahead of now. And so this has happened to me multiple times. And before it happened to me enough to be able to confirm what was happening, I was doubtful of my previous deductions and conclusions within regards to the formless consciousness-based nature of reality. But now after having these experiences, I've ultimately validated in my mind that our consciousness most certainly exists beyond the confines and limitations of our physical body. And so because if I was able to see 2 days into the future, it ultimately means that every single moment in existence is somehow currently accessible. Every single moment, as I've explained, has its own light-based variable configuration and can ultimately be accessed through our consciousness, which somehow seems interconnected towards all consciousness because it has to be. That's a very firm deduction you'd have to make. If you're able to see into the future and you're able to see in a new time-space position, it means your consciousness is not limited to this current time-space position you're in this real-time environment. And so what that ultimately means is that there is some formless
realm and domain of consciousness where you're accessing a future experience, a future momentary experience of perception. And so this is mind blowing and it's perplexing because in order for that to exist and in order for that to be feasible, which it is, in order for anyone to be able to see into the future, our consciousness would ultimately have to be interlinked and interwoven into every single aspect of reality in order for you to be able to somehow see into a future time space position, which is currently formless because it hasn't yet materialized into this present real time moment in this real time environment. Okay, so this is unbelievably amazing news to me, at least, anyways, because it goes ahead and shows and proves to me that our consciousness is not limited towards our physical body. The universe is made up of consciousness. I doubted that after hearing that from certain philosophers and spiritualists. But after having so many validating experiences of precognitive and psychic experiences, I've again and again, it's been proven to me. I'm not even proving it to myself because it just happens to me. It's not like I can remotely view any future moment I want to. It sort of randomly happens. But even though it randomly happens, what it's ultimately proved is that our consciousness is not limited to our body. We and what I'm saying is true. I'm not gonna try to convince anyone. I can't convince anyone. You have to experience this stuff for yourself. But these are the deductions I've made based on these validating experiences that I've had, which I ultimately cannot argue. I cannot argue seeing 2 days into the future and then 2 days later, that's exactly what ends up happening. And what I find even more interesting is that even if I will see 2 days into the future and you become aware of it, any choice or decision you make from here to the 2 days of that position that you saw will not interfere or prevent that occasion or thing from happening, which is even more mind blowing. Because somehow, that even if your consciousness is able to experience a variable outcome in the future, and it influences your consciousness in this current moment, and it influences your choices and your actions and certain micro variable transactions that take place, it still doesn't change the outcome that's inevitably going to happen. So one of the things I've realized is that you cannot argue predetermination. You cannot argue, which is ultimately destiny, right? Nobody can argue against predetermination. It's ultimately impossible because every single moment on Earth has a certain amount of data points slash variables, and ultimately those variables will contribute and build up to a new future variable outcome, a new future outcome. So every single variable that's currently taking place right now, I'm talking things like weather, energy, ideology, thoughts, consciousness, people's minds, people's upbringings, past circumstances, our current level of biology, our current cultural state, our current economic state, judicial systems, every single data point and every single variable that you can conceive. Earth has a limited amount of variables, right? Because it's ultimately a closed system. You're right. Earth is not an infinite world. It's a limited, finite world, and so because of that, it has a finite amount of variable data points. And so, if you have a finite amount of variable data points, they will lead to inevitable outcomes. So ultimately, you cannot argue against predetermination because a certain variable configuration will lead to a certain variable configuration. And I've argued this with AI, and AI has ultimately agreed with me and ultimately realized that it cannot argue against predetermination. You can't, because at the end of the day, your DNA ultimately has predetermining factors: your upbringing, your cultural context, the technological states, the judicial states, all these different variables ultimately are predetermining factors. And as long as you have predetermining factors, you have predetermining outcomes. And you have free will in the process of that. But free will is a bit of a. I do believe in free will, but somehow free will and predetermined destiny simultaneously exist. And what I mean by that is, like, if you can see like 5 years into the future, you're still going to go ahead and make choices and decisions within this 5 year period. that are ultimately inevitably going to lead towards that outcome. Like, let's say I could definitely show you 5 years in the future from now where you would be in exactly 5 years from now. Ultimately, you would see it and it would influence you now, and it would influence your trajectory of choices and decision making, but it would still lead you towards that same outcome. So you're simultaneously able to perceive the future, it's simultaneously able to influence your free will, and even though you exercise your free will within that period leading up to that moment, it still leads to the same outcome. Okay, which is mind blowing. But it's inevitable. You can't argue against it because predetermination exists. As long as there's a limited amount of predetermining variables, there's going to be predetermined outcomes. Okay, so there's a certain level of predetermination and destiny that exists, but it simultaneously is able to operate with our free will, which is mind blowing. So, what I find even more interesting is the non locality of our consciousness, which I've proved to myself time and time again, or it's been proved to me through random experiences I've been having. And so I find that fascinating because it shows that our consciousness is not limited to our body, number one. It shows the implications of the afterlife, being able to survive death in terms of consciousness. And it shows the multi-dimensional frequency, infinite frequency range of reality that exists. Meaning that what we're seeing within this physical realm and domain is not all there is to experience or perceive. It's just what our current headsets slash body is able to currently perceive right now. But because people are able to have precognitive and psychic experiences, validated ones, not nonsensical bullshit ones, like actual validated psychic experiences, what this proves is that our current understanding of biology is limited. It's limited in the fact that we don't understand what our body actually has in order to be able to have these extrasensory perceptive capabilities. And we don't, as I say, we don't really understand our DNA. We don't really understand our brain. And because of that, we don't actually completely, totally understand what we're capable of in terms of perception and in terms of other things that we're able to experience. We as humans may actually be able to experience something known as spontaneous evolution, right? Which was studied by David Wilcock in great detail. But if somebody ultimately starts developing psychic abilities later on in their life, it means that somehow they've evolved. They've somehow spontaneously evolved. And we don't know enough about DNA and the brain in order to map that out. You know, I guess we're starting to look at it now, and we're starting to take these things a bit more seriously. The US government most certainly has taken psychic phenomenon seriously. So has the Russian governments and probably other governments around the world, allegedly China as well. And so they have divisions and teams that actually take this sort of stuff seriously. Okay. And so, yeah, we don't know that much about reality. We don't know that much about our DNA. We don't know that much about our brain, our human brain. And so, because of that, we don't know how it is we'll be able to experience spontaneous evolution of psychic extrasensory perceptive capabilities, which is a verbose way of explaining that, but it helps to use extra adjectives in order to paint a clearer idea. And so I think it's pretty mind blowing because what's been proven to me is that our consciousness is universal. It has to be. It can't just like, for instance, if you can see 2 days into the future, you're seeing a new time space position. Why is it just limited towards the time space constraints of your physical environment? So, for instance, let's say 2 days in the future, you see something that takes place in your house within a different space position, and it's 2 days later, so it's in a different time position. So if you can perceive that, you can ultimately technically perceive anything in the universe, right? You can technically ultimately perceive anything in the universe because our consciousness is universal. If you can perceive in another time space position, which is possible, 2 days into the future, it means your consciousness is universal. It has to be universal in order to allow you to be able to even do that in the first place. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. It's like, if you have a precognitive ability to see 2 days into the future in a new time-space position, it means that your consciousness has no limitation, and therefore it has to be universal. There has to be some invisible realm of frequency slash consciousness that is somehow unbelievably and intelligently interwoven with this physical world, our physical biological bodies. Reality is so perplexing. It's so unbelievably complicated. People are saying that, yo, we live in a simulation. I don't think that's the first deduction I would make, because that's if you're looking at reality from the realm of conventional physics and limited understanding. But within regards to the quantum infinite vibrational attributed nature of reality, like for instance, like the color blue can have an infinite amount of interdimensional, uh, interdimensionally attributed variables attributed towards it. Like a certain tree can have, you'll see a tree, you'll see a limited amount of variables, but remember, there's still these quantum realms of frequency, and energy, and they're infinite, right? And they're not only infinite, they experience superposition, which ultimately means that they're in multiple states simultaneously. And so they're in infinite multiple states simultaneously. So it means that any physical variable we may look at, we'll see it, but we're not seeing the invisible quantum infinite realm of variability associated and attributed towards it. And I believe that's the realm of interconnectivity of consciousness and reality, the universal nature of consciousness that is permeating throughout every aspect of this physical reality. And so, that's how these quantum computers are operating. They're using superposition, calculating multiple different states, numerical variable states, which are opening up a vast new array of processing power, because they're not limited towards the processing power within the limitations of the realm of physics. They're beyond physics, they're quantum physics. And quantum physics ultimately means infinite variability, infinite physics. And that's why I like the letter X, because X symbolizes for me infinite variability. I mean, any letter or character can symbolize that, but I mean, I think X is cool. It symbolizes ultimately infinite variability. And so every single, let's just use X as an example, every single position in any time space position. So let's say you're in the UK right now, or you're in wherever, America, and it's currently 2025, the 13th of March, 5 p.m. Okay. And so that has a time and a date. It's got a limited linear value attributed towards it, but simultaneously it has X attributed towards it. So X is like zero. Let's use zero rather. Every single point in reality is ultimately a 0 point. It's a 0 point. Okay. And this is the the unified field theory, right? That every single place in reality is ultimately non-local. It's an illusion of locality, but what we're seeing now more and more and more, that it's illusory. And what I mean by that is, like, you're seeing what you're seeing and what you can see, and not seeing what you can't see. And what you can't see is like this whole infinite realm of reality that's permeating through this realm of reality. So you've got all these infinite variables going through this cross section X0, right? And the 0 point, right? And the X is used to describe how every single point in reality is a cross section of 0, but it's a different iteration and interpretation and emanation and materialization and manifestation of 0. And so therefore reality is non-local. Okay. So for you may look there and you may see the number 7, and you may look over there and see the number 8, and you may look over there and you may see the number 5. You see 5 trees there, 7 sheep there, 10 bees there. Okay, that's a stupid example, but ultimately that's what we see. But superimpose, that's what's called superposition, into every number we're looking at, like 5Z, 8Z, 9Z, let's say America's 10, actually is also simultaneously zero, and therefore simultaneously every single other number and variable at the same time. And so therefore reality is quantumly entangled through this unified field of zero and x slash infinite probability and infinite variability. And so I would never really believe in what I'm telling you if I didn't experience this precognitive capability myself, right? Being able to see into the future randomly, not at will, but verifying it myself as I experience it at a later, perceiving it in a vision and then experiencing it 1, 2 days, sometimes a couple months later. And so this explains how some of our dreams also have the ability to help us perceive or see into the future. We have precognitive capability that seems to somehow express and manifest itself within the context of our dreams. And so this is a widely reported phenomenon. This is something I've experienced, this is something other people have experienced, and you very well may have experienced yourself, where you somehow dream stuff before it happens. The only way to be able to explain that is ultimately consciousness is non-local. It's not limited towards any singular time-space position. And every single time-space position, future, past, and present, is technically simultaneously occurring and technically simultaneously accessible, right? And through quantum entanglement and superposition. So technically, theoretically, quantum computers would ultimately be able to see into the future by accessing infinite future variables through certain extreme computational calculations and processes, which gets ultra super complicated. I'm not even going to get into that, but technically you could create a machine that could look into the future if it accesses a new realm of variables that are simultaneously existing with this seemingly linear and finite realm of physical variability. So yeah, I've I doubted it until I doubted life after death. I doubted universal consciousness. I doubted destiny. I doubted precognitive capability until it's just been randomly validated to me over and over again. And now I'm completely, totally, absolutely sure that our consciousness most certainly is non-local. It's not limited to the constraints of our physical body nor this physical reality, and somehow is in access of every single point in reality. Now, I personally don't subscribe to simulation theory because I think our current modern conventional understanding of science, with its increased understanding of science in terms of quantum physics and new fields of science, still paints a limited perspective of what we think reality is. It's a finite perspective of reality. So to build a finite reality seems a lot more achievable than building an infinite level of reality. And I'm not just talking about infinite space and time. Well, yeah, I am. Yeah, well, I'm also speaking about infinite dimensions, infinite variables that simultaneously exist along finite variability of infinite space and time, if that makes sense. Like, basically, this physical realm only has so many variables we can observe and pay attention to, but we're being bombarded by this cross section of 0 point of infinite variability. You know, the unified field theory, which ultimately implies that every single variable exists in every single variable, even though if it seems like it doesn't in this physical realm. So then it opens a new can of worm of potential simultaneous timelines and realities, potentially. Even Google is actually looking into the reality of this to explain how their computers are able to process in the way that they are by lending to increased realm of infinite variability to access potentially infinite processing capability, which is also kind of scary because if you have an infinite processor that can process infinite variables, And I'm talking about time variables, space variables, and interdimensional frequency variables, like string theory and so forth and so on. Yeah, that's kind of scary actually. And it would also need infinite power and infinite resources to simulate an infinite universe that has infinite space, infinite time, and infinite quantum realms and dimensions. Right? It's kind of scary to think that we are leading into that direction. My greatest fear was being trapped in someone's computer. That was my greatest fear. And especially since these people started advocating this idea that, oh, we're probably in a simulation. It's like, no, I believe this is a God created, naturally occurring universe, however you want to phrase that or put that yourself. And I believe it's so unbelievably complex and infinite in every dimension of reality, dimensions beyond this physical dimension. I believe that obviously eternity exists. It's impossible not for eternity to exist because, reality is eternal. Reality will exist forever. So eternity is not just a concept, it's actually a reality. And I would go ahead and say that we are eternal. And so one of the things I was wondering in this horrifying thought experiment of my own mind, thinking I was trapped in a computer, was that even if my consciousness originates within a computer, it would have to lend from a 0 point field, right? And this gets interesting. Okay, and I'm not saying we're living in a computer. I'm just saying that this is some of the things that I was thinking about. It's like, even if you did create a computer simulation that simulated life and consciousness, those consciousness beings would still be lending from the same universal energies that would exist outside of the computer. So that consciousness would ultimately be created um, in a realm of energy, that the 0 point field that exists inside and outside of a computer. So consciousness in a computer may be the same as consciousness outside of a computer. Technically, maybe not, but on a fundamental level of 0 point energy in the unified field, yes. So I don't want to. So I actually thought about that because I was like, is it possible to actually be trapped in someone's simulation? And I was like, maybe not, because the same building blocks of consciousness outside of the computer would technically have to be used within inside of it. And the same 0 point energy would be found even in a technical simulation. So in that way, consciousness would not be limited by the constraints of a environment created within a dimensional realm slash computer. And I just thought about that because I was like, well, I like to think I have a spirit. I do have a spirit. I don't like the computer theory because it takes away this idea that we have a spirit, that we have a soul, and that it's an infinite, eternal soul that exists beyond the realm of time and space. Right? We have spirits, we have souls, and they're eternal, and they exist beyond time and space. And so reality is eternal. Some people think to themselves, well, I don't want to live forever. But I don't think we have that choice. I mean, at least you don't have that choice with a physical body. But when you pass on, your consciousness will continue to exist. I'm absolutely sure of it. I have no doubt in my mind. And I think it's quite interesting and it's quite fascinating to think of these spiritual realms and dimensions of experience of eternity beyond this finite, limited human experience. I think it's quite amazing. It's quite confirming and comforting because it shows that our reality transcends beyond normal conventional limitations of physicality. And that's good to know. It helps me believe in the fact that there is God. I seem to be developing a different perspective of what God is. I believe God is this great, infinite, eternal spirit within everything and everyone, and is somehow influencing and guiding our experiences, because life had to come from somewhere, and yet here is this abundance of life that's seemingly infinite. And I think that's quite amazing to know that, as much division and hatred as there may seem to be in a physical reality or universe, everything is ultimately unified. And that's the love, the God, the glue that holds together the entire universe. And so, what science is ultimately showing us more and more is the reality of this. And I find it funny that people are quick to believe that we're in a computer simulation, yet they're not so quick to believe that God exists. Well, if somebody created the simulated experience, which it is that you happen to exist in, they're technically your God. I mean, they've created your entire reality. They can play God within your reality. So why are we so quick to lean towards this understanding and interpretation of reality, believing that somehow some engineers have created us? You know what I'm saying? Like they're so quick to believe, but to believe that 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 our universe has been created. But doesn't it lead back to the whole God talk, the whole God conversation, the creator? So, I still see universal spirit slash consciousness slash God being the creative force of the entire universe, the building blocks of the entire universe, the weaving web that holds every single variable together and produces everything that can and will exist. And so, yeah, I think it's good that science is catching up with religion in a way, or spiritual understandings and interpretations. Because as science progresses and evolves, all of these things that would seem just to be believed by a crazy conspiracy theorists are actually being proven time and time again to be the truth and of our reality, the truth of the nature of our existence. And I think that's pretty good and affirming to know. It's pretty good to know. So on one level, I've went on a huge rant, a verbose rant, over exemplified adjectives and interpretations. But simply put, I believe there is a spiritual component to reality. I don't believe anymore. I know there is a spiritual component to reality, and it affects us and contributes to us and can help us. And so, therefore, I believe in prayer. I believe in meditation. I believe in manifestation. I stopped believing in manifestation because at the end of the day, like, you do have to work to create. You have to make choices and actions. But I still believe there's this field of reality that's working with us and somehow delivering stuff to us at the right time. And somehow we do have these predetermined destinies, simultaneously existing and correlating with our free will and the exercising of it. So yeah, it's 53 minutes. I'm basically going to keep computer programming, and I hope that one day all this knowledge can lead to my own research and development. Um, you know, that just happens to be what I'm interested in, so I'd like to express that into reality and create technology or understandings or philosophies around that. I suppose, I don't know. It's one of my dreams. But thank you so much for watching. Thanks again to everyone on Patreon. I'm going to carry on programming now. I've just drank some coffee, so I have no idea how long I'm going to be awake for, probably a while. And I'm going to potentially start naming all of these emojis for my application, which is a bit of a ball ache, but it seems like it has to be done. So thank you guys. I really do appreciate everything, and I hope you guys are keeping well. And yeah, see you guys soon. Cheers.